I'm Dave.
And I'm Dallas.
Together we are your Wino Windbags.
We have opinions on all things media and entertainment. Sometimes they're on point, sometimes they go down easier with a glass of wine.
You know you want some, so come get some. Welcome, everybody, to Wine and, the show where we pair wine with movies, TV, music, books, comics, and maybe one day we'll pair it with, I don't know, TTRPGs. I don't need a life anymore. Pretty sure Dallas doesn't either. I'm pretty sure he's on board with that. We could even go into card game RPGs, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon for you kids. We need more kids listening to this show, I guess. Not really. Illuminati, New World Order. That was my favorite card game when I was younger. Anyone who hasn't heard of that one, go look up that card game. It is amazing. I'm pretty sure it's out of print and hard to find. You're going to blow a lot of money on that, but do that anyways. And you tell us what wine you would pair with Illuminati New World Order. I've never steered you wrong. So trust me, it's an amazing card game. Well, okay, except for last episode and the one before that. But trust me this time, Illuminati New World Order. Check out that game. Tell us what wine you would pair it with. It's been a long, long time since I've played it, but I would pair it with... it's actually, it's a complicated card game. So something with very low alcohol. Otherwise, it's going to get out of control very, very fast. So go with that. But you know what? For now, we're going to keep our non-geeky social connections alive, and we will simply pair wine with music. We'll talk about all that in just a moment. But first, if you like what you hear, please make sure to hit that follow or subscribe button. It helps the podcast grow and reach new listeners. And if you love us, then please leave a 5-star review. If you don't love us, just send us a message. No review, forget the review, forget your crybaby review, finger off the trigger there, Sundance Kid. And if you're on your phone, speaking about messages, you can send us a text. You'll find a clickable link at the beginning of the description of this episode. It doesn't work as an active link on every platform, I've noticed, but it does on most. So if it is a live link down there where it says send us a text, just click that, which opens up your text app, and send us a direct message via that, which shows up in our Buzzsprout inbox and does not show us your full phone number, never fear. It only shows us your final 4 digits, kind of like how a credit card shows on a receipt. It's just a right here, right now, quick and easy way to send us a quick note. We really do want to hear from you, even if it's a crybaby complaint. So please send us that message. Now, today, we have special guest Kate Reuschel, a wine creative, writer, and educator who specializes in Portuguese wine. She writes the Substack Survives on Wine. That is survivesonwine.substack.com, just like it sounds. Survives on Wine, which is where I discovered her. She comes from a 15-plus year career in the fashion design industry, and she continues to practice her visual art over on her Substack, where she creates wine infographics. And my favorite part of her Substack, visual wine tasting notes, which are these really cool kind of wine Rorschachs where she'll stain a piece. I'm not sure if it's parchment or fabric. She's going to tell us this when she comes on here in just a moment, but she stains something with the wine itself so you can see the color. And there it is. Okay, so there's a visual here. She's showing us her back wall, which is littered with the images of her visual wine tasting notes. So it's like an ink blot but a wine blot of the wine, so you can see the color stained on this, whatever it is she's staining it on, parchment of some kind, something that soaks it up and displays it very well. And then she will put the adjectives, the tasting notes themselves, all around that wine with the name of the wine and the producer, so you know exactly which one you're talking about. And honestly, I'm going to get some to hang on my wall as well because they're amazingly cool. So if you go to her Substack, you can just do a search for visual wine tasting notes. They will all come up and you can just look at those. The wine infographics also, if you're learning about wine. And who isn't learning about wine, no matter how knowledgeable you think you are? But even if you're a newbie and a beginner, those wine infographics are choice. So check that out. So, Kate, first off, welcome to Wine and so your story regarding why your Substack is called Survives on Wine is pretty heavy, and I'd love for you to tell that story to our listeners if you are willing, please.
It is pretty heavy. Yes. So about actually 6.5 years ago, I was diagnosed with blood cancer. It took a really long time to get my diagnosis, and I lost a lung and a phrenic nerve so yeah, but it was blood cancer. So, and I'm in remission, 6.5 years in July.
Fantastic.
But thank you. So while that was all happening, I had to transition out of doing textiles full time because for some medical like pain issues, just wasn't really sustainable anymore.
Right.
And wine had always been in my life. My dad was a collector. I've always loved it. I've worked in wine at various points, but never did it seriously. And so cancer kind of
Right.
gave me the ability to restart and learn something new. And I finally had time to invest into wine education because, as you guys know, wine is complex and you need time.
So complex.
It's so complex. So what survives on wine is kind of my little dark humor way of saying, wine gave me a reason to survive. It gave me a future where, cancer kind of took away part of my past, and that's okay. Wine has given me the ability to survive and look forward. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
I mean, I love that
Way
message.
to turn it
obviously.
around, man. That's a
Yeah.
great origin story. Seriously.
Thank
And
you,
the
Dallas.
visuals alone. I mean, yeah, that's fantastic. That's beautiful. That's
Thank you.
beautiful.
Thank
Yes.
you.
And my next question for you. So Portuguese wine is definitely something you have deep diven into. Why Portuguese wine?
Oh man, that's a complicated story too. I was right in the middle of studying for my WSET 3, and I kind of just life was happening, and every test I had scheduled, I had to reschedule, and I was getting really frustrated. And finally I just sat back and was like, you know what? I can't be an expert in everything. Originally I had wanted to go for that MW and, be the expert and invest like 10
Yeah.
years into studying, and all that kind of changed when I kept having, changes kept getting in the way and plans kept getting changed. And I
Yeah.
finally was like, you know what? I need to just pick a country. I need to make that what I study, what I focus on. And Portuguese wines had always been something that I love that are not super appreciated in where I am. I'm in the Midwest. And you can find them here. You can't find a lot, and a lot of distributors don't even really carry them. We're not the Chicago market, so we kind of like Chicago gets a lot of them, but we're kind of forgotten about.
The coasts do too, but
Yeah.
but that's we're kind of, it's easy to get to us because we're right there on the coast.
Exactly,
So, yeah.
exactly. Shipping's easy for you guys, well, easier.
Sure, yeah.
So Portugal was a place I had always wanted to go. My partner speaks Brazilian Portuguese, not like, he used to be pretty fluent. It kind of fell off for a while, but
It's fading.
Yeah, it's fading, but we're getting it back. He's getting it back,
Okay. Good.
And so I picked Portugal, and I haven't looked back, and I fell in love with Portugal. The first time I landed in Portugal, I was blown away. And I'm someone who's traveled a lot of Europe. I've lived many summers in France. I've lived in England, and there was something about the beauty of the country and how small it is, but how wine is a part of almost every person's identity.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone has a tie to wine. Someone in their family was a winemaker. Someone was a wine grower. Someone worked at the vineyards. There was some connection to everyone with wine. And I've been to a lot of wine regions, but I've never met people who are more proud of where they were from. And so it kind of just all those things together just kind of made that decision just the right one. And of course, I've completely fallen in love with Portuguese wines and the grapes. And so,
yeah.
Fantastic.
I mean, I will say, me and Dallas have talked multiple times on just how much bang for your buck you get out of Portuguese wine right now in the States. Like,
totally.
If you can find some,
I
because
totally
they're
agree.
not no one's heard of these grapes, no one's heard of these regions, so like no one's asking for them. But if you introduce people to them, the quality you get for the amount of money you spend on the wine is nutso. So I'm a huge growing Portuguese wine lover. I think you posted recently a visual tasting or an infographic or tasting note. I can't remember now. The Tariga Franca.
Oh, that was a tasting or a visual grape
tasting.
guide. Grape guide.
But
there was also
guide.
a tasting note. So you're right. You were right. It was
Yes.
both.
Okay. That's why I'm confused. Okay. Maybe it was both.
It was.
So yeah, and that was a grape where I'm like, ooh, that Triga Nacional. Yes, I'm getting well experienced in that. And a couple of other indigenous grapes over there. But then that one, I was like, now wait a minute. I don't know. I'm not even sure if I've had a blend that I've knowingly had a piece of that in, because it wasn't listed on the bottle anywhere. So
Okay.
that took me a moment where I was like, I think I need to actually try and hunt that down to see if I know what that grape even is, and how it's used in Portuguese wines and whatnot. So, but as we've already mentioned, you learn forever in wine
Yeah.
because there's so much. There are, especially now that indigenous grapes are becoming pop, like people are embracing them again in their home countries, and they're starting to get exported and imported in different places. There have always been thousands of wine grapes that have just been sort of ignored for a long time, and now they're all out there, or they're becoming more and more out there. And I think this is a great time it's a great time to become a wine lover because of how much variety you have, and whatever your budget is, things like Portuguese wine becoming more accessible, you can find amazing, great, interesting, culturally relevant wines for your budget. You don't have to waste a lot of money on this right now. And I'm just, it's such a great world, but it's impossible to keep track of.
You
It's
know,
impossible to
I
know
think
everything about.
I think Dave, as you were saying, the sort of bang for the buck comes
Yeah.
from just such a long tradition and deep history of, to you, the ubiquity of wine
Right.
in Portugal.
Mm.
Like you were saying, Kate, it's on everyone's table, it's in everyone's family, it's in everyone's story. Everyone has a connection to it, and I think now, because of the way shipping happens, you can get some of those grapes that are just sort of, really regional, really sort of just
Right.
specific to a mountain or a hillside, and
Right.
that value is it is right there on the bottle, on the glass, and it's kind of fantastic because it also, at least to my palate, it's just some of the most interesting wine you can find too. It's just really, really interesting. So yeah,
I love
we
that.
may be picking your brain about the that Portuguese sort of
Well, and it's the
wine.
1-2 punch too of they've been producing wine for a long, long time, so they're
Yeah,
very good at it. The vine, the vines have age on them, like it's an
yeah,
established wine region,
Mm.
but we're learning about it for the first
exactly,
time. So the
exactly.
prices aren't premium yet because they can't sell it at those prices over, because they're like, you don't know what these wines are, you haven't
Right.
heard of half of these
Yeah.
grapes. And so you're in that sweet spot right now where the world, they have to keep prices low so the world learns about them. But I do think, like all wine, when this happens, will catch on to the quality of it. And this
Mm,
won't last forever, folks.
right.
So,
Yeah.
Get in
don't
now.
waffle for 10
Yeah.
years. Right,
Bye
right.
now.
Goodbye
Right.
now. Go find Kate and bug
Yes.
her about her
Yes.
recommendations.
Seriously,
Yes.
bug me. I love recommending
Yes, go to
Portuguese
her
wines.
survivesonwine.substack.com, and she's there, and she answers comments and she answers chats. So go there, harangue her, find out what she knows about Portuguese wine. And Kate, you also mentioned you have a background in the music world as well, which is why we're here to talk about an album today. So what's your music related experience?
Well, I was professionally singing from the age of 9 till about 28. I classically trained in opera, jazz, all that goods. My grandmother uh, got into Juilliard for opera, but then it was the wartime, so she married my grandfather and
Mm,
dropped out.
Mm.
But
Ah.
right.
because of that, I was very blessed and I got her vocal cords, and she kind of got me into piano playing and singing immediately as a kid. Um,
Mm.
so I grew up, classically trained doing jazz off Broadway. I did some off Broadway tours. And then when I was 17, I started interning at my first recording studio for like
Very
a
cool.
senior, you got like a senior project you could intern for half the day. And so I chose a
Uh-huh.
recording studio, and then it went on to becoming obsessed with working at recording studios, assisting engineers and, help setting up the microphones. And I kind of did whatever because I was the only girl. So they kind of just had me doing everything, but I learned a ton and
Right.
I loved it. And I did that for many years. And then somehow I ended up recording on like a dubstep UK grime type album, and I was singing with some UK rappers, and it was great.
That's awesome.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I was going to say, when you said you were a vocalist, first and foremost, at least back in the day, I was like, well, and hysterically, you chose an almost instrumental album
Yes, I
to
know.
talk about
That's
today.
true. Lots of dub, yeah.
I know, sorry.
Yes, but the dub does come back to it, and then of course you
It
did
does.
work in engineering studios,
Yeah.
so and
Yeah.
producing, and so I was like, okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense because this
Yeah,
is
the
an
production
album where
aspect,
that's a
absolutely.
heavy
I knew
element
I
of it.
threw
Yeah,
you
yeah.
guys for a little loop on this one, and I was like, I hope this is okay. I could pick another one.
Oh yeah.
No, you didn't actually. You didn't.
Okay.
You really didn't. I'll
No.
tell you why. Because just a bit here before we get into it. I remember, this is a side note, kids listening. Back
Okay.
in the 90s, we had something called record stores and music stores, and many of them had little listening stations where you could go and pop in an album that was brand new, put on your headphones, and listen to it under the pretense that you might buy it. Unfortunately, I never purchased anything. I listened to the entire album from start to finish.
Especially if you were a kid, you didn't have any money. You were just
right,
like, I'm just here to listen to
Totally.
music.
But what's crazy is I was really into the world music sort of phase when it hit in the late 90s and early 2000s. And this, after I listened to this album the third time, I remember listening to this album from start to finish. It was around the same time I picked up another album by Morchiba, which some crossover we'll get to later on as we get into it. But yeah, so good rec, Kate. Very good rec.
Thanks.
Yes. And I will say we're gonna get, so we've already, let's go ahead and do this actually. Now that Dallas sort of launched us on this, before I introduce the album proper, let me do a quick introduction. Then me and Kate will say what our backstories are with this album or not. But I will say that I appreciate this album coming in right here, right now, at this point in the podcast too, because we started off. Dallas chose our first album, which was the 1972 Ijibam Yasi by Can. We have a Carly Rae Jepsen album dropping this week as we're recording this, our first Carly Rae. And when I put on social media that the Carly Rae was coming, someone on social media was like, I'm loving the variety already on this. And I'm like, you know what? I think that's a big thing, is that variety. Like, we're not here to talk about 70s and 80s music or modern contemporary music or just American or UK music. Like, it's anything, everything. And I'm really excited that with guests, especially, they're going to bring on stuff that we would never think to bring on. Like, it's just wasn't on our radar or long gone from our radar. And here they are coming on with something that they're very eager to talk about, and we get to experience it. And I think that's one of the perks of doing a podcast like this, is that you get forced to, like, now I'm going to not just listen to this, but I'm going to listen to it multiple times, really find out what I think about this. And so far, it's just been a blast. Now, that said, this is an album that Kate actually posted on her Substack last year sometime and introduced me to the album that way. So I've had a little bit of a head start on that. But let's introduce the album first. So this is Gotan Project, their debut album from 2001, La Revancha del Tango. Now, Tango, the revenge of the tango is what that means. Now, Gotan is just an Elvezra, which is switched syllables of the word tango. So tango, go, tan, right? So that's where that comes from. And that's apparently, this was news to me, but that is a common, Elvezra is a common wordplay in tango lyrics that they like to do. So it was very much in line. Now, these are three musicians. The Gotan Project, they are Eduardo Makaroff from Argentina, Philippe Cohen Solal from France, and Christoph H. Müller from Switzerland. And it was those three who came together. They're doing traditional tango with electronic elements like dubstep and drop and things of that nature. And this album was a bit of a sensation when it dropped. It made the 1001 albums you must listen to before you die book, which is, so hey, one down, 1,000 to go. And there we go. But before we go any deeper into this album and what it is, so Kate, what is your background with this album? When did you discover it? How long have you been listening to it? And what were your thoughts when you first heard it?
All right, so this is kind of why I chose this. This album came out in 2001 when I was interning at Milk Boy Recording Studio outside Philadelphia.
Ah,
So I that working at that studio, I was introduced to so much music, which was such a huge perk.
Yeah.
But when this album was released, it became like an anthem for me. I got in before everyone. I cleaned the studio. I kind of, did the little things that I needed to set up for the day for the musicians to come in and record. And I always had this album playing. And it just I don't it just made me smile. It just
mm,
brings such good memories for me up that I just throughout my life it's kind of been a staple. And then fast forward a long time, till 2013, there was a coffee shop when I was living in Florida, a coffee shop that I'd go to every morning before work. That's also a wine bar with like a little Parisian style cafe outside.
oh,
Nice.
And this
cool.
was always on rotation. And I happened to meet my partner of 11 years there while this was, always on rotation. So it
Oh,
has
Okay.
like, it has two
my
really
All
God.
right.
So
positive,
much significance.
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Very nice.
yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. So for me, Kate introduced me to it through writing about it. She does one other thing that I failed to mention that she does on her Substack is she will occasionally do a 3-way pairing where she does a wine, a recipe, and an album
Mm.
all together. And so she did one. I still haven't tried the recipe. A lot of the recipes are baking, and
Yeah.
I'm so in my cooking phase right now. And like I've left, I used to be more of a baker than a cooker. And now I'm cooking and I'm not baking as much. So I keep sort of bookmarking the recipes, but I'm like, oh, I'm not in the baking mindset right now. But
Do you
I
remember the
do keep
recipe,
trying.
Kate? I'm
Uh,
a baker, so.
so yeah. So hold on. I have to remember. Oh my gosh. This is how
Okay.
horrible is it? Which recipe was this one? It was, I think was it was it my,
I want to say it was a babka type thing
it
that
was.
might have been
Yes.
with it.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's the one. Okay, so it is delicious.
Cinnamon? What kind?
let me
Mm.
let me get it for you because now
Okay,
I'm
I'll keep chatting
Yeah,
away. I'll
go.
keep
go ahead.
Yeah.
nattering away while you look at that. But so I read her post on that, and she was like, "Here's an album, here's a wine, here's a recipe," and I'd never heard of the album, never heard of the band, and that's always. I say doing this podcast is a perk that way, but I've also been wired for maybe at least the last 5 years. I've been really, really big into expanding my own personal musical horizons. I realized that my musical tastes had calcified for like in my adult years, and I basically, like most people, you take what you listened to when you were a youth and you expand that a teeny tiny bit, but you're basically locked in to what you decide you like and don't like, barring a rare exception. And in the age of streaming, I finally just decided, I don't want to be that person. And this is stupid. I have streaming. I have the world of music at my fingertips. There's no reason to listen to the same stuff I've been listening to since I was 18 for the rest of my life. I need to listen to more things. I saw her post and she had a Spotify link and everything right to the album. And, we're going to get to the track by track discussion of this album, but right from track one, I was just like, okay, yeah. This is it's an album to do things to. It is
Right.
an album to cook to just work at your computer to. I highly recommend. I have a standing desk. I'm standing right now while we record this. I don't sit. And I highly recommend doing that because you're going to want to do a little butt wiggle while you like something that is not like you got to do a little sidestep while you're listening to this thing, just a little, even while you're still being productive. And if you're in a chair, I feel like that's too distracting. You're going to try and move the chair and then you can't really get the work done. But if you're standing, kind of like cooking, you're usually standing at the counter, at the stove, or the what have you. And I think that, or take a long walk and listen to it while you're walking, whatever it is you're doing. This album from track number one, I was like, okay. I actually sent Dallas a track last year because we share Spotify links all the time. I don't blame you for not remembering Dallas because, we send a lot of Spotify links to each other on a day-to-day basis. But at least one, and I think 2 tracks on this album sometime in 2023, I shot over to you. I believe you liked them and enjoyed them and whatnot. But I was into this album. I did a couple plays, a couple rotations of it, and then moved on to other things. And when Kate brought this up as a possibility to listen to here, I was like, oh, yeah. Yes. I remember I was into it for like a month last year. Let's go back to it and let's deep dive into it and really take a look.
It's that kind of album, actually. It is.
Yeah. You can
you're
revisit
rotating. It's
easily.
on rotation for a couple of weeks, couple of months. You forget about it. You check back in, and you're like, oh shit, yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Yes.
Dave, just real quick to get back to you. It was my sugar cookie recipe.
Oh,
it's a sugar cookie recipe. I should do that one then. That's easier. I'm so right. I've never baked bread in my life. That is the one thing I've never crossed that line. So I'm a little nervous about it.
Easiest thing ever.
Yeah.
Easiest thing ever.
So worth
so
it.
easy.
So worth it.
I know it's a little bit. It's bread, but it's also cake. You know what I mean? So
totally.
It's like it's kind.
By the way, if you have an old a babka which is going stale, a lovely little breakfast French toast can be made. I'm just saying.
I knew I liked you, Dallas.
I'm just saying.
Yes. Dallas is the man to go to too for I'm always like, oh, I have a blankety blank, and he's like, you know what that would be good on? You know what you can make with that? And I'm always like, that sounds like work, dude. I just wanted to I just wanted to complain. I didn't want solutions. But that is how his brain works. He is always about like how you take what's in your pantry, what's in your kitchen, and like rework it in magic ways. And I'm sure he's 100% right because he's more into it than I am.
But it sounds like work. That's true.
Yes, it does sound like work. So this band, the one thing I'm going to mention before we get into a track by track discussion on this album, there isn't a lot of information about this band out there or the making of this album per se. They are three independent artists that do work together frequently. Two of them, Müller and Makaroff, even have another band, Müller and Makaroff, that is literally called that. And so they are constantly moving from project to project, from concept to concept. Gotan Project made 3 full-length albums. They have not made a fourth to date, but never say never, because you never know. They're all still alive, so it could happen in the future. But this was their debut, and their first thing they released was in 1999. They did release a single, and that single is 2 tracks on this final album: Vuelvo al Sur and El Capitalismo Foráneo. And they released it as kind of a single. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we go track by track. But these 2 songs, it makes sense that they started here because they're actually 2 covers. They're 2 covers of classic bandoneon songs. And the bandoneon is a type of concertina. Concertina is like an accordion. So it's the Argentinian. This is the version of an accordion that's very popular in Argentina, also Uruguay, as a side note. It is a typical instrument in most tango ensembles. As with most other members of the concertina family, it is held between the hands, played by pulling and pushing air through the bellows, routing it through sets of tuned metal reeds by pressing the instrument's buttons. Unlike most accordions, though, bandoneons always employ the same sets of reeds to produce their sound and do not usually have the register switches common on accordions. Nevertheless, the bandoneon can be played very expressively, as we find out in this album, using various bellows, pressures, and other techniques. So these were 2 classic bandoneon songs that were covered by this band. So they weren't 100% original songs and original recordings. But when I listened to this album, one of my favorite things, there's this little percussive thing that happened, and I thought it only happened in one song, but it was one of the first things to stick to my head when I listened to it. And it's that little thing that happens, and it got stuck in my head so much that only this listen, preparing for this podcast, did I realize it was 2 songs that came back in. And when I discovered they released these 2 songs side by side as a single, I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Interestingly, though, they did not only did they split the 2 songs, they're not side by side on the album, they even reversed the order of them, because it was Vuelvo al Sur first on the single, and here it closes the album, of all things. And again, no information as to why that decision was made, but it is interesting, to say the least. So
and
all right,
quick,
that is
real quick, Dave, a little more on the sort of origins of tango. Often the sort of tango is associated with the Rive La Plata, which is the La Plata River, and itself is sort of a blended music style. It
Right.
kind of owes its origins to, much like jazz, to kind of outsider counterculture areas that create this sort of really specific musical vernacular that then kind of just takes off and kind of takes over the world, much like tango did with in the Americas, and particularly in France and Europe at the turn of the last century. And in terms of the style, Argentinian tango seems to be much more swingy and groovy and deeper in terms of its language. European tango kind of comes off a bit sort of staccato and militaristic, and even though it's still very sort of celebratory in its way. So that bandoneon, the instrument itself, features heavily, much more heavily in Argentinian tango. But in general,
it is more festive.
It is.
Yeah.
It's much more festive.
Yeah.
Much more festive. So yeah, let's see.
All right.
Where are we now?
Anything else before we track by track this?
Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Let's get into it. All right. So track number 1, Queremos Paz, We Want Peace. Kate, what do you think of this very first track?
Well, I love it. I have to I love the whole album, so I'm going to say that on every single one. I think for me, I don't know, right now in the world, and probably always, people have just wanted independence. They've just wanted peace. You need a song to kind of get through the tough times. And for me, this is kind of it. And I don't know, when I hear this song, because I always tend to listen to this album with this song first, even though like I'll jumble up the rest of them. This is kind of the first one I want to hear, and it gets me in the mood. Like it gets me in the mood to like,
yes,
yeah, let me listen to the rest of the album. Like they're standing for something, but you know, they're a little vague in what they stand for with the album. They don't really, you know, but there is that sort of, I'm fighting for the people, because tango kind of was the people's music originally. So I don't know. It just really gets me in the mood for the rest of the album, and it's what I want to listen to first. So,
you know, I'm big on the sort of first strike of an album, because it sets the tone. It's the onboarding, it's the on ramp, and I think this one does a great job, because it does have that kind of not a sort of rebellious kind of thing, but there is this sort of almost like rousing. It's a rousing kind of sort of preamble almost. And I do think, you know, these guys have gone on record a few times to say that, you know, we are not your sort of counterculture rebellion band, you know, even though this music came out at the same time that Argentina was going through massive upheaval. And so they have to say, look, this is just, it's just endemic to the music. This is not us being, you know, sort of overtly political. But I think this first song definitely is sort of a great sort of preamble into, you know, where they go.
Yes. I wrote down the same thing. One, this is a great on-ramp into the album. It even kind of fades in an interesting way, where you're just sort of like, it's already like the music's already kind of happening, and you're just entering the room where it's happening. And it has this, like, it's a smooth beat, it's chill, but still lively, which is, I think, that thing, like, to get through the tough times, you're like, it's festive, it's lively, but it's also like, you can keep this tempo up. Like, this is not going to exhaust you. You just got to keep chugging along. You just got to keep going. It's an amazing introduction to the bandoneon and that sound, which when I first listened to this album, even listening now before I looked up what that sound was and what instrument was making it, you always, in this day and age, you're always like, is that a synth? Is that is that not actually an instrument? Right. That sound, it's so smooth while being festive. It's a weird combo that works so brilliantly well. And so this is a perfect appetite. Like, it's an appetizer. It whets that appetite. You are ready for more. You're like, what is this? It's cool. It's nice. So yeah, one of the most pleasant openings of an album I can think of in recent memory. 100%. All right. Next, we move on to Epoca, which means time or period, or of course, literally epoch. So what are your thoughts, Kate, on this as a second track?
Love it. I think it follows up really well. From what I'm gathering, like trying to, figure out what the meaning was behind this song.
Right.
What I'm gathering, it was like for hope for the Argentinians. And another thing, following up from like a song about independence and peace, like to kind of, or like what tango is standing for the people, and Epoca just kind of, I don't know, it gives you more of the music, it gives you more of them, but then it gives you this hope that I can't wait to the next song. I can't wait to the next song. And I feel like the music just, you're really starting, or at least like in this song, I'm really starting to want to move. Like and for me, if I'm listening to a strictly, well, this isn't strictly instrumental, but highly instrumental versus like vocal, I want to be moving. I want the music to make me want to move nonstop. Like I want it to bring out emotions, and this one for me brings out emotions. It gets my spirits high, but not like you were saying, like it's not overly and then I'm going to crash. It's kind of like building me up, and I think it's beautiful. And I love how it also, you get that classic tango mixed in with it, but not in a sense that you're really thinking about the tango, or at least for me, I'm not thinking about the tango in this song. It's just kind of in the melody and the rhythm.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Dallas.
Yeah, for sure.
Dallas, your thoughts on this one?
Similar. It is, again, it's just a great next sort of step. One thing I do like about world music in general, I hate the term because that's the term they came up with in the late 90s when all this sort of fusion stuff started happening. It's world music. Okay, all right.
Music that isn't ours as white people.
Don't know what to call it.
As American
world
white people.
Music,
Right.
But one thing I do like about it is when you are sort of thrust into these albums, into these sort of sonic scapes, you do end up just sort of wandering about, and you're kind of tossed about, with the rhythms and the sort of themes and the textures. And, so often your ear will want to find that traditional kind of pop style, or at least the sort of benchmarks of pop styles that you're accustomed to. And this album does not give you that. There's a great quote, by the way. Where is it? Where's the quote? When they were writing the song, Müller said to Eduardo, you should write lyrics like a love song, but about a time when the people are disappearing. It can happen in a love affair, but it happened to your country and, with the young people who died. And so it is this sort of lament for youth. And he's personifying this sort of character because he's referencing the he in the lyrics of the song. And, I think the poetry of the song, it just really does encapsulate kind of the sort of collective spirit of what the country was going through at the time, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally, sonically. And great second note for sure.
Si desapareció. Él ni aparecerá. Creyeron que murió, pero renacerá.
I will say, mostly agree. This is a heavier song on the album,
Right.
because of the subject matter and what it's about. I love the dramatic strings that are also a part of this song. This is the first time we're really hearing something quite that prominent from the string side of
Right.
things. The vocals are very good. I will say, this was a track that I think the first time I listened to the album, I loved it. I was like, yes, a perfect second track. I think especially they probably put this number 2. This is one of the most heavily vocal tracks on the entire album, and I almost feel like it was throwing people a bone who like are reticent about instrumentals, where they're like, no, don't worry, we have some vocal.
We have
Here's the
voices
most
too, guys.
vocals we have.
Yeah, this isn't just a
Right.
jam session.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, here's a bunch of vocals, and then we're gonna fool you, and by the time you're on song 3 or 4, you're gonna you'll be in, you'll be hooked or not, but by then you've given it a real chance. But at the same time, I will say, I don't 100% know why. Maybe it is because of how chill and maybe even heavy this is compared to some of the other songs. But in future listenings, this is the one and only track I'm always tempted to skip
Interesting.
when I'm listening through the album in order. I always want to go from track 1 to 3. And track 2, I'm just sort of like, yeah, I can listen to it, but and none of the other songs do I feel that way about currently, because that does change over time. Of course, that always usually morphs as your whatever time of your life you're listening to an album. But right now, this is the one and only. This is a near perfect quote unquote album for me because of how unskippable almost every single song is. This is the one caveat as I have for this one. I don't know if it's all the vocals. I mean, she's even a great vocalist. She's great in the other songs that she does vocals on. But this one, for whatever reason, maybe it lulls me a little too much, where I'm just sort of like, I need to get back to something a little like the first song wasn't exactly super fast upbeat. And I think I just need something more lively as track number 2 in my brain, or I start to like my brain just starts to threaten to check out. So but this is the only one that
also a bit of sort of texture here, guys. You may be familiar with this song because like a lot of their tunes, they're kind of used in jingles and in media and in advertisements. This was featured heavily in a jet dry dishwasher commercial. So if it sounds familiar, that is why.
Oh, goodness.
Speaking of commercial properties, let's get on to track number 3, Chunga's Revenge, a cover of a Frank Zappa song.
Christoph, Eduardo, Nini, Cristina, Gustavo, Eddie, Lynn, Fabricio. Es la revancha del tango. Piazzolla, Troilo.
So, Kate, your thoughts on this one?
I love it. But I'm a huge Frank Zappa fan. So for me to say I love something that's a cover of Frank Zappa, that I think blew his original out of the water for me.
Honestly, I agree with that.
Oh man, the strings, the dissonance, it just
This is a better version.
I love
it's
it.
a better version of the song. Yeah.
I agree.
It's different. It's different. It's
better
different, yes.
and different.
Better.
It sure is different.
It's
Better.
different.
It sure is different
It's
and better.
Different. Better? No. But definitely different. Sorry, go ahead, Kate.
No, I was just, I mean, no, I love this. Yeah, I've said the dissonance for it is, I'm a huge fan of dissonance in music,
Me
which I
too.
think is also why this album
Me
I
too.
just love so much. And probably not everybody loves that. I know a lot of people, it makes them a little uncomfortable, like they don't really understand it. It's a little darker, melancholy. But for me, it's just, I don't know, it brings a smile on my face. It just makes me want to listen more. So
yeah. How about you, Dave? What'd you think?
I mean, I love this. So I will say I was not familiar with the Zappa version before before this. So I had to go track it down on Spotify when I realized this was a Zappa. I didn't realize it was a cover. I was like, Chunka's Revenge. I love this song. And listening to it, and then they're like, when I was looking up information about this album in preparation for the podcast, I saw it was a Frank Zappa cover, and I was like, oh shit, okay, well I have to hear what the original was. It is fascinating, the differences between them. I'm pretty sure the bandoneon is playing the guitar part that
I think
Zappa sort of
so
solos.
too.
The bandoneon, it is, but there's also the is it the what's the organ? Is that
the
a
keyboard?
Hammond?
Whatever the keyboard.
Was it like a
the
Wurlitzer?
keyboardy-
I think it's a Hammond. I think it's a
Hammond.
Hammond. And it is
You
taking
think most
over
of them are
that
Hammonds.
solo. And it's taking
That's usually
over
your
that
answer every
solo.
time there's a strange keyboard. You're like, it's a Hammond. I'm
Yeah,
like,
well,
the Hammond
because-
can't be everything.
Well, to be fair, yeah, it can, because
It kinda can be.
It can actually be. The Hammond is the workhorse. It's the thing that people just, because it has such a specific sound. It's orchestral, but it's also soulful, and
Totally.
it lives in kind of the same space where the guitar does. You know, when you're wailing on a guitar, or in the case of the Zappa version, the wah-wah saxophone. In Zappa's, it's the wah-wah saxophone. If you guys don't know what the wah-wah is, saxophone, it's a distortion sort of device treatment, essentially. It gives you that moaning, wailing kind of thing you'll find. And
is the guitar pedal thing called wah-wah as well?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so you get that treatment on the saxophone. And I am always going to be in defense of saxophones. I think we use them too little now. I think the 80s ruined it to a certain degree. I think we need to
we needed a break. We needed a break.
Saxophone, because it is phenomenal. But in Zappa's version, it is that wah-wah saxophone that takes the lead, that does the vocalization. And, you know, there's no way you could compare the two. I do love Gotan's version of it, and
you say that
it is, you know, to your point, Kate, it's the dissonance that sells it. It stands on its own. I think this is probably the most pop friendly record they have, because even with the dissonance, you know, I have a very broad definition of pop though, and so
apparently
very, very broad. But I do think, because of that dissonance, because the way they play with that sort of emptiness and that air and that lightness, and then with the, you know, just the treatments, it's fantastic. Zappa's version is its own thing. It's pure expression. It lives in its own little place. Better? No, just different. But go on.
Yes. So I will say I love the gravelly bass voice, the vocals on this one, which are only here and there, but it gave me heavy Alabama 3 vibes from the lead singer there, like the Woke Up. For those who watch The Sopranos, Alabama 3 sung the Woke Up This Morning theme song to The Sopranos. So, you know, you got that woke up this morning kind of a thing. And it's just like, oh God, yeah. Like it. So it feels like a tango, Alabama 3 doing tango, you know, and you're just sort of like, yes, this is fantastic. So track number 4, this is my favorite track on the album. For me personally, Triptych, the 3 parts, which it is kind of in 3 parts. I'm just going to give a quick little ramble off here because I tried to break it's 8.5 minutes long. So it's the longest song on the album. It squeezes a lot out of every minute, though. So minute 1 to 2.5, it's this slow build with percussion, keyboard, bandoneon leading the way. And just as it threatens to get repetitive, the piano comes in, or whatever the keyboard instrument for this one is. In minute 3 through 6, it's this piano and guitar dual solos with a little bit of violin peppering in, a little bit of string. And then minute 6 to 8.5, that is the violin coming to the front and just this virtuosic solo section for it. So it just keeps building and flipping around on itself in a way where, for an 8.5 minute instrumental piece, I think it's brilliant in it knows exactly how long it can give you one thing before switching it up. And then you're right back in with it the moment
enough,
that new thing
my
comes
favorite song in the album too. Favorite by far. By far. It
I
does.
wouldn't say by far, but cool.
Oh, by far.
Yeah.
For sure. By far. And it does this, like you said, it does this sort of seamless blend of the orchestral, the folk, the tango, that trip hop sound. And it's almost like it's just fantastic. I cannot explain how much I like this song. Going back to my original statement that I enjoy songs that just take you to places you cannot anticipate. And for that reason, this song is just really satisfying for me. How about you,
Cool.
Kate?
Kate.
So this is my second favorite song.
All right.
It's kind of tied with, we'll get to my favorite song. But I absolutely love it. It makes the jam band girl in me very happy because
Yeah.
it makes me really happy. I think the progression, it's almost, I don't know, it's almost like with the tango vibes, it's almost like the instruments are dancing around each other.
Yes.
And so like, I think that's how it works. You're in the first part. For me, is it the accordion that gives off those like classic guitar riffs? It just like,
Yes.
yeah, it's amazing how it does that. And I don't know if I've actually ever heard that before outside of on this album. But but how it kind of draws you in, and then you get that piano coming in, and it's almost like it's twisted up a tango beat, and then I don't know. Then you add the strings, and it's just a full-on jam session, and I'm a happy girl.
I'll go a step even further, Kate, and say it's, to my ear, it's almost like the genres are dancing around one another.
Yes.
And again, that's kind of the mark of a true, I think, master of true masters.
Yes.
They're taking these genres and dancing them around one another. That's
totally
what blew my mind about it. Yeah.
Thank you for listening, everybody. We will be back tomorrow with part 2 of this episode, where we will cover tracks 5 through 11 of Gotan Project La Revancha del Tango with our special guest, Kate Reuschel of Survives on Wine. That is survivesonwine.substack.com. Please go look her up there. But she will return with us as well, and we will also, of course, get to the wine pairings for this album. We will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye now.